In June of 2021, a ghost haunted the heartland of Brazil. For 20 days, a single man, Lázaro Barbosa de Souza, held an entire region in a state of siege, sparking one of the largest and most intense manhunts in the nation's history. The operation became a national spectacle, a real-time drama, broadcast live into the homes of a captivated and horrified public. Residents were too afraid to sleep, abandoning their farms, living in a constant state of alert. This was more than just a hunt for a killer. It was a mirror held up to the country itself, reflecting deep cracks in its public security, its justice system, and its social fabric. It was the story of a system that had created a monster and a society that became obsessed with watching him run. This is the anatomy of those 20 days of terror. Part 1. The Making of a Fugitive. A 14-year cascade of failure. To understand the chaos of 2021, you have to understand that Lázaro Barbosa was not a new threat. He was the final, bloody result of a long and violent criminal career, a career made possible by repeated, catastrophic failures within Brazil's justice system. His path began on August 27, 1988, in Barra do Mendes, a small, impoverished town in the arid backlands of Bahia, in northeastern Brazil. This was not a place of opportunity. His early life was marked by the instability that often breeds violence. A 2013 criminological report would later state that his psychosocial development was critically impaired due to his family environment, abuse of alcohol and other drugs, and financial situation. He wasn't born a monster, but the seeds of one were planted early in this harsh soil. Even during his infamous manhunt in 2021, thousands of kilometers away, the residents of his hometown were terrified he might somehow return, a testament to the fear his name still inspired. His transition from a troubled youth to a violent criminal was swift and brutal. In 2007, at just 19 years old, he was arrested for a double homicide. This act immediately established his capacity for lethal force. But his first encounter with the justice system also established what would become the defining pattern of his life: impunity. Just 10 days after being arrested for 2 murders, Lázaro escaped from custody. This was the original sin of the case, the system's first and perhaps most crucial failure. It sent a clear message that for him, capture was not a definitive consequence. He then relocated thousands of kilometers away to the federal district, the seat of Brazil's government, effectively disappearing from the radar of Bahian authorities. This highlights a critical vulnerability in Brazilian law enforcement, a lack of robust interstate coordination for dangerous fugitives, which allowed Lázaro to simply move to a new jurisdiction and start over. After arriving in the federal district, he was arrested again in 2009. This time, he was convicted of a trifecta of serious offenses: theft, rape, and illegal possession of a firearm. He was incarcerated at the notorious Papuda prison complex. This was the system's chance to correct its first mistake, and, on paper, they seemed to recognize the danger. In 2013, a damning psychological evaluation was conducted. A team of doctors and psychiatrists produced a report that was not just a warning, but a prophecy. They described him with a chillingly accurate set of characteristics: impulsive, anxious, mentally unstable, and possessed of sexual worries. This document was an unambiguous red flag. It was a clinical diagnosis of a predatory and unstable individual who required maximum security. Instead, the system's response was one of catastrophic negligence. In 2016, despite a history of double homicide, rape, multiple escapes, and this psychological profile, Lázaro was granted temporary leave from prison during the Easter holiday. The decision defied all logic and proved to be a fatal error. True to form, Barbosa used the opportunity to escape once again. The cycle of institutional failure did not end there. He was eventually recaptured in 2018, but the system had apparently learned nothing. On July 23, 2018, he escaped yet again, this time from a facility in Aguas Lindas de Goiás. He would remain a fugitive for nearly 3 years, a ghost in the system, until his name exploded into the national consciousness in June 2021. The tragedy that followed was not merely predictable, it was actively facilitated by a series of baffling institutional decisions. The revolving door of the justice system had released a monster it was incapable of containing. Part 2. The Incra 9 Massacre and the Spree of Terror. The nearly 3 years Lázaro Barbosa spent as a fugitive came to a horrific climax on June 9, 2021. The crime he committed that day was an act of such calculated brutality that it served as the catalyst for the nationwide manhunt. On that morning, Barbosa broke into a small holding, a chácara, in a rural settlement known as Incra 9, on the outskirts of Brasilia. Inside the home were 48-year-old businessman Claudio Vidal, his 43-year-old wife Cleonice Marquez, and their 2 sons, 21-year-old Gustavo and 15-year-old Carlos Eduardo. What transpired was a massacre. Barbosa murdered all 3 men with a combination of gunshots and knife wounds. As he prepared to flee, he kidnapped the family's sole survivor, Cleonice Marquez. In a final desperate act, Cleonice managed to make a phone call to her brother, alerting him that something terrible was happening at her home before she was taken. When her brother arrived and found the horrific scene, he immediately contacted the police. For 3 agonizing days, Cleonice's fate remained unknown as a frantic search began. On June 12th, her body was discovered by a stream, not far from the scene of the initial crime. The nature of the Incra 9 massacre represented a terrifying escalation in Barbosa's behavior. This was a familicide. The decision to execute the men and then abduct, hold captive, and ultimately murder the wife and mother served no discernible practical purpose for a criminal on the run. It suggests a motive that transcended robbery or evasion, entering the realm of sadistic, terroristic violence. It was this profound cruelty that explained the extreme level of fear he would go on to inspire. Following the massacre, Barbosa did not go into deep hiding. Instead, he embarked on a brazen 20-day crime spree across the rural landscapes of Goiás and the Federal District, a day-by-day narrative of terror. June 10th. The day after the massacre, he invaded another farm just 3 kilometers away. He held the owner and a caretaker hostage for 3 hours. In an act of pure psychological domination, he forced the owner to cook for him, all while boasting about the murders that were already dominating media coverage. He also forced his victims to drink and use drugs with him before fleeing with cash, cell phones, and a jacket. June 11th. He stole a car in Ceilândia and drove to the neighboring municipality of Cocalzinho de Goiás, where he set the vehicle on fire, a clear attempt to destroy evidence and cover his tracks. Authorities believe he may have been aided by a partner. June 12th. The violence escalated again. After invading one farm and holding a caretaker hostage, he broke into another property that same night. The 3 occupants of the second home fought back. Barbosa shot all of them, leaving 2 in critical condition. He then fled with 2 firearms stolen from the residence, rearming himself for the war to come. June 13th. He stole another car, drove it for 30 kilometers until he neared a police barrier, then abandoned it and once again vanished into the dense woods that had become his sanctuary. June 15th. The manhunt was in full force, but Barbosa continued to engage his pursuers on his own terms. After being spotted by rural patrollers, he exchanged fire with police, managing to graze an officer's face with a bullet before escaping, seemingly unharmed. June 16th. He was spotted again in Cocalzinho de Goiás, where he invaded another house and took a family of 3 hostage. He led them into the woods, but when he noticed police helicopters closing in on his position, he released the hostages and fled. This chronological trail reveals a highly calculated and adaptive criminal. His actions were not merely about survival. They were about instilling terror and demonstrating his control. Part 3. The Hunt for a Ghost. Operation Lázaro and a deeper conspiracy. The massive law enforcement operation to capture Lázaro Barbosa was an unprecedented mobilization of resources. Yet for weeks, it was an exercise in frustration. The scale of the operation was immense. A multi-agency task force of over 270, and by some counts up to 300 officers was assembled. It was a coordinated effort involving the civil and military police of both Goiás and the Federal District, the Federal Police, the Federal Highway Police, the Military Fire Department, and elite special operations units. The force was equipped with a formidable arsenal of technology, including helicopters for aerial surveillance, drones for reconnaissance, and highly trained sniffer dogs. However, the operation was immediately confronted by 2 significant obstacles. The first was the environment itself. Barbosa, described by officials as a skilled matero, woodsman, and hunter, was operating in his element. The region around Cocalzinho de Goiás is characterized by rugged terrain, dense forests, caves, and numerous streams, offering near-limitless opportunities for concealment. The second challenge was a deluge of misinformation. The intense media coverage and public panic led to a flood of false sightings and fake news, which repeatedly diverted police resources. This created a fundamental mismatch of tactics and terrain. The police deployed a conventional, high-visibility force, establishing roadblocks and conducting large, systematic searches. But for a stealthy fugitive with an intimate knowledge of the land, this massive presence was easy to detect and evade. In essence, a modern, heavily equipped army was hunting a single guerrilla-style fighter in his home territory. The initial failure of the task force to adapt its tactics to this asymmetric challenge is what allowed a lone man to outmaneuver a small army for 20 days. As the manhunt dragged on, a new and disturbing narrative began to emerge. On June 24th, the investigation took a dramatic turn with the arrest of two men, a local farmer named Elmir Caetano Evangelista and his caretaker, Elaine Reis dos Santos, on suspicion of aiding the fugitive. The caretaker's testimony provided the first concrete evidence of an external support network. Reis dos Santos told police that Barbosa had slept and eaten at Evangelista's farm for 5 consecutive days, and that the farmer would summon him from his hiding place by shouting his name into the woods. This revelation fundamentally reframed the case. It suggested that Barbosa's incredible ability to evade capture was not solely due to his survival skills, but was also enabled by a logistical support system. Following Barbosa's death, this theory was amplified by high-level officials. Goiás Public Security Secretary Rodney Miranda and Governor Ronaldo Caiado publicly speculated that Barbosa was not acting alone, but may have been a jagunço, a term for a hired gun or enforcer working for powerful local farmers. This theory posited that his crimes, perhaps even the Incra 9 massacre, were not random acts of madness, but targeted operations connected to land disputes or other criminal enterprises. This hypothesis offered a chillingly plausible explanation for many of the case's puzzling aspects. It provided a context for the support he received from Evangelista, and a potential source for the $4,400 in cash, about $800 USD, found in his pocket at his death, a significant sum for a fugitive supposedly living off the land. The jagunço. The theory transformed the narrative from a story of a singular monster into a story of a violent instrument wielded by a hidden hand. His death would conveniently silence the only person who could confirm these suspicions. Part 4. The Final Confrontation and the Legacy of Fear. After 20 days of eluding one of the largest police operations in Brazilian history, the hunt for Lázaro Barbosa came to a violent and conclusive end. On the morning of the 20th day of the manhunt, the task force finally cornered its target. Acting on intelligence, police located Barbosa in a wooded area in the municipality of Águas Lindas de Goiás, reportedly near the residence of his ex-mother-in-law. The official account, provided by authorities including Governor Ronaldo Caiado and Secretary Rodney Miranda, was clear and decisive. They stated that when surrounded, Barbosa refused to surrender and resisted arrest violently. He allegedly unloaded the pistol at the officers, who returned fire in self-defense. In the ensuing shootout, Barbosa sustained multiple gunshot wounds. He was taken from the scene alive, but succumbed to his injuries on the way to the hospital. The news of his death was announced triumphantly by Governor Caiado on social media, who declared, "Goiás is not a bandit's Disneyland." This sentiment was echoed in videos that quickly circulated online, showing police officers cheering and celebrating as Barbosa's bleeding body was loaded into an ambulance. While the official narrative presents a clear case of a justified shooting, the context surrounding the event complicates this simple conclusion. The primary objective of a manhunt is typically to capture a suspect alive to face trial, answer for their crimes, and provide intelligence to investigators. A lethal outcome, while sometimes unavoidable, forecloses these possibilities. The overtly celebratory atmosphere among law enforcement and the triumphant political declarations suggest that a deadly resolution was seen as the most publicly and politically satisfying outcome, regardless of the loss of potential information. This is particularly significant given the Jagunso theory. Barbosa's death was extraordinarily convenient for any powerful individuals who may have employed him. It permanently silenced the one witness who could have exposed a wider criminal network, identified his patrons, and provided clarity on the motives behind his brutal crimes. The final confrontation, therefore, remains shrouded in ambiguity. It was simultaneously the successful conclusion of a massive police operation that ended a reign of terror and a complex event that raised unanswered questions about whether justice was truly served or simply silenced. The death of Lázaro Barbosa brought an end to a 20-day nightmare, but the phenomenon he created left a lasting and complex legacy. His case transcended the boundaries of a typical true crime story to become a cultural touchstone, holding up a mirror to deep-seated anxieties and systemic dysfunctions within Brazilian society, its media, and its institutions. First and foremost, the case stands as a stark indictment of the Brazilian criminal justice system. His long history of escapes, coupled with the baffling decision to grant him temporary leave despite a psychological evaluation that identified him as dangerously unstable, highlighted a system plagued by negligence and procedural failures. For many Brazilians, his ability to operate with impunity for so long confirmed their deepest fears, that the state is incapable of protecting them from known and predictable threats. The media's role in the saga was equally significant. The relentless 24-hour coverage often veered into sensationalism, with some outlets novelizing the manhunt and framing it as a dramatic, celestial battle between absolute good and pure evil. He was widely and often inaccurately labeled a serial killer, a term that, while headline-grabbing, was disputed by criminological experts. This media frenzy did not just report on the public's fear, it actively manufactured and amplified it, transforming a dangerous man into a mythological boogeyman. Furthermore, the case became a vessel for social and political prejudices. Media reports and public discourse frequently linked Barbosa's alleged actions to Afro-Brazilian religions, tapping into a deep well of religious racism in the country. This demonization led to real-world consequences, including persecution and violence against religious communities who were baselessly associated with his crimes. Politically, the case was seized upon as an opportunity for populist posturing. The triumphant rhetoric from officials and the subsequent push for reactive, panic legislation prioritized short-term political gains over thoughtful, systemic reform. Ultimately, the legacy of Lázaro Barbosa is not merely the memory of his horrific crimes. It is the story of how a single fugitive can expose the fault lines of a nation. His case revealed a justice system in crisis, a media landscape prone to sensationalism, in a society grappling with fear, prejudice, and a profound lack of trust in its institutions. He was a brutal killer, but the phenomenon of Lázaro Barbosa was a creation of the very society he preyed upon.